Hi, it's MK here. Welcome to my channel, Curls and Pages. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the Abhorsen Trilogy by Garth Nix. And this video is part of my series Oldies but Goldies, where I discuss books that are 5 years or older, and the intent is really just to shine a spotlight on some literary gems that I don't think we talk about enough these days. I think as a society, and of course this trickles into BookTube, we're really focused on what's new. So I kind of just wanted to take a step back and also talk about some things that are a little bit older, but are nonetheless as exciting and relevant today. So before we start talking about this series, I just have a silly little side story that I wanted to share. While I was getting ready today, I was looking through my liquid lipstick collection, of which I admittedly have way too many, and I noticed that I had this shade called Grave. And I don't know if you can read that, if it's clear enough, but I thought it'd be a very appropriate shade to wear today because this series is chock full of necromancy and the undead. So let's start talking about these books and why I recommend them. And I'm going to start off by providing you with a brief background of each story, then talking about why I recommend it, what really stood out to me, and then who I think these books will appeal to, and some things that you might not necessarily like about these books as well. So I like to think I am a little bit unbiased. Probably not. I love this series, by the way. It's something I read in my childhood, and it really stuck with me throughout all these years. It was a very inspirational trilogy for me. Okay, so the Abhorsen Trilogy is part of the Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix. It has a 4.53 rating on Goodreads, which I think it absolutely deserves. There is a fourth book, which I'm not going to be talking about today, that was published quite some years after the last book in this trilogy. So in this trilogy, there are 3 books. That's why it's called a trilogy. There's Sabriel, which was published in 1995, Lyriel, and then the Abhorsen, which was published in 2003. So the last book was published maybe around 15 years ago. So quite old, but I do think that they stand the test of time. They're still really worthwhile to look at today. This series is full of, as I mentioned before, necromancy, but also really courageous heroines, unforgettable allies, really entertaining, sarcastic, lovable free magic beasts, and most importantly, I think it has a really great story and a hugely unique magic system, which I'll talk a lot more about later. Okay, so high level, this was written for a younger age demographic, I believe ages 10 to 12. So you're not going to find a lot of adult themes. However, it does deal with death, which is very heavy. But I think it does it in a good enough way that if you get this for, I don't know, a younger reader, it isn't going to scar them for life, hopefully. Definitely make sure that if you are getting it for a younger reader, that they do have some concept of death, or else it might be a bit scary for them. And yeah, that's just a warning. Okay, so I do believe in reduce, reuse, and recycle. And that's why I am going to basically be summarizing the Goodreads summaries for these novels. So let's start off with the first novel, Sabriel. So Sabriel has us follow our young heroine, Sabriel, as she embarks on this incredible journey through the Old Kingdom. When we first start off in this book, it's actually in Ancelstier, which is this reality almost that has no magic. So there's 2 realities in this novel. There's Ancelstier, and then there's the Old Kingdom, and they're separated by this wall. So Sabriel has lived her entire life in Ancelstier. She knows of the Old Kingdom because everyone does, and her father is a prominent figure there. Her father is the Abhorsen. So he's kind of a big deal. He is part of one of the prominent bloodlines in the Old Kingdom, and essentially he's a good necromancer. There are evil necromancers and, of course, other villainous creatures. The Abhorsen must fight, and, you know, that's their job. That's what they do, and it's a very important role. So just to let you know, there are 3 really important bloodlines in the Old Kingdom. There's the Abhorsen bloodline, the royal bloodline, as well as the Clare. And the Clare are these women who have the sight. So they make prophecies. And it's really interesting. All of these bloodlines have some magical abilities embedded into them. So Sabriel, in her final semester, her father goes missing, which prompts her journey. So she has to go into the Old Kingdom and find out what has happened to him. I think this book is fantastic. I think Sabriel's journey is quite intense. It's full of magic and peril. It can be creepy at times. It has a really great dark theme. I will say that as a character, Sabriel is slightly underdeveloped. She doesn't go through any great epiphanies. She's a bit flat. She does gain some more confidence and understanding as she goes through this novel, but for the most part, I do think that in terms of characters, my favorite character in this trilogy is actually Lariel, and she's the heroine that we're going to follow for the 2nd and 3rd book. And that's not to say Sabriel isn't a good character. I do think she's entertaining and smart. I think she's a very sensible young lady. And I also really enjoy another character in this novel, Mogget. So Mogget is one of my favorite characters, and he's this lovable, sarcastic, sassy creature, and he's just great. It provides a lot of humor. Anyways, so that's Sabriel. That's a little bit about the novel. Now let's talk about the other 2. So there's Lariel and the Abhorsen. So Lariel, we're introduced to our 2nd heroine, and when we're introduced to her initially, she's very unsure of who she is. She was born into the Clare's bloodline, so she grew up on the glacier where all the Clare live. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the Clare are all females. I think the sight is only passed on to women. So the Clare are very important, and they have a lot of traditions. So when Lariel doesn't receive the sight, which is her birthright, she's left very vulnerable. And I think we've all felt like that sometimes in our lives. However, throughout this novel, Lariel starts gaining some confidence, and she meets an ally, the disreputable dog, and they become steadfast companions. I really like the side characters that Garth Nix has created. I think they are wonderful additions to the stories, and I don't think the stories would be half as great without them, to be honest. They provide a lot of heart, in my opinion. Anyways, so Lariel has to start dealing with this growing evil threat that was introduced in the 1st book and becomes very prominent in the 2nd, and in the 3rd, it's really the focus of the story. So in this 2nd novel, we're introduced to the character, we start learning more about her, and she goes through this almost quest of self-realization of who she is, and what she is. In the 3rd novel, we are still going with Lariel as our main character. Sabriel does appear in this though, which is nice. So a lot of the characters in the 1st novel do appear in the 3rd, and this 3rd novel is really just the climax of this great battle between good and evil. So Lariel, she's a lot more confident now. She's found out who she is. She's the Abhorsen in waiting. And that's not a spoiler because it's on the back of the book. So she essentially has to work with Sabriel and find a way. They have to search through life and death to stop this evil who's called Uranus. And Uranus is the destroyer. He was one of I think they're called the 9 bright shiners. And it's all interconnected with the lore of this world. So it's a very deep, rich book, and I do quite enjoy it a lot. So I just wanted, that's the synopsis of this trilogy. I think I went a bit detailed, but if you're still interested in these books, I'll let you know why I like them so much. So first is the setting. I think that the setting is very interesting and unique, and there's a lot you can do with it. The fact that there's Ancestral and there's also the Old Kingdom, it creates a very rich dynamic. Ancestral is, as I mentioned before, without magic, but they have a lot of technology. And they also look at the Old Kingdom as like this foreign, bizarre thing. And then in the Old Kingdom, it's like this really dangerous place, fraught with peril. And this is because 200 years before this story begins, actually the queen and her 2 children were slain, and their blood was used to destroy 2 of the 6 charter stones. And I mentioned charter magic before, so free magic is a lot more dangerous and unnatural. It's a lot more dangerous but natural in origin, whereas charter magic is a lot more controlled and orderly, and it's safe to use. So there's charter mages who are actually able to connect to these charter stones, and they're able to essentially recite different charter ruins, and enact magic. So unfortunately, 2 of the charter stones were broken, and the queen and her children slain. It caused anarchy, and there actually hasn't been any ruling body since that incident. So yeah, the Old Kingdom is a very dangerous place, very lawless, but it does mean that there's a lot of adventures that can go on in there, I guess. So the second reason I really recommend this book is because of the magic system. I think that if you have the time and you are an author, or you just really enjoy intricate, well-designed magic systems, I think you should just give the wiki page of this novel a read, because I think whoever wrote it did a very good job at describing all of the details and aspects. So I've already mentioned quite a few things about it. I am just going to briefly talk about death in this world, as well as necromancy. So, death is described as 9 precincts. Essentially, death comes in stages. It's characterized though as this long stream of water, and it's dark there, it's hazy, it's like the weather in Toronto right now. It's a joke, but honestly the weather is fairly awful. It's very muggy, but it's very foggy there, it's hard to navigate, and there's lots of like pitfalls and traps where someone who's wandering through these precincts can get easily caught and dragged under to the final 9th precinct, which is final death. So once you go beyond the 9th precinct, there's no way to retrieve you. Each precinct has its own characteristics. So for example, the first precinct is just is mostly knee-deep water. It has eddies and pools, and it ends with a gate, which is a huge waterfall. In contrast, to the 9th precinct, which I think is the most terrifying, it's an endless pool of deep, still, clear water. It's warmer than the other precincts, and there's no fog, allowing necromancers to see in every direction. The 9th gate resembles a starry sky, confirming the final death of those who look upon it. So that's death in this world. Very creepy, very imaginative. And now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the bells. So for necromancy to work, you need to either have bells or whistles. These musical instruments are named after the 7 bright shiners who invested themselves in the charter. So the third reason that I really recommend this book is because I think that the mood that Garth Nix invokes is very chilling. this complex dark fantasy, and I think that it's just such a nice breath of fresh air compared to regular fantasy, where it can be gritty, but it doesn't have that sense of chill and foreboding, at least not commonly. So I really do enjoy the theme that Garth Nix has in his books, and I think it contrasts very nicely with his heroines, who are very inspirational and courageous women. It's just this nice dichotomy. Now, who do I think would enjoy these books? I think really, as long as you're able to put aside who these books were written for, a younger audience, and when they were written. So at the time, I don't think it was as important to have glimpses into the character's head as it is now. I think you'll be able to find things to enjoy about this book. It's epic quests, epic fantasy, and I think, honestly, both young and mature readers are able to enjoy this series. Now, that being said, I have read a lot of Goodreads reviews that criticize this book or that don't necessarily enjoy this series. And what I found was that a lot of them spoke more about character development, the pacing of the plot, and the fact that you might not necessarily have a lot of perspective from each character. And I understand those criticisms, and to be fair, I do agree with them to a certain extent. However, I do think that the good outweighs the bad, definitely outweighs the bad. I think that this is a really great series, and I can't recommend it enough. So if you're able to kind of put those things aside, I think that you'll find this is a really rich fantasy world that you can spend countless hours getting lost in. So, it's a really long review, but I hope you enjoyed watching. I really think that, if you're used to more fast-paced books, you can still find some enjoyment out of this. You might think that the writing is a bit tedious in Sabriel, but you might be pleasantly surprised with Lariel that Garth Nix does improve in his second novel. I do also want to say that if you are interested in giving this book a shot, I really recommend that you go to your local library if you have the chance and the opportunity to, of course. Not that I don't want to support the author, I just think that it's important that, you get a chance to read it without necessarily spending some of your hard-earned money. Or, you can just read an excerpt or ask a friend if they can borrow it. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have any feedback, if you want to discuss the novel, please keep it spoiler-free, and I would love to hear from you. Okay, see you all later. Bye.